So it's time to finish up chapter one from the psychology of money. So last time I got to the graph that was talking about what inflation did to prices in your teens and 20s for people born in 1960 versus people born in 1990. Americans' nationwide unemployment in November 2009 was around 10%, but the unemployment rate for African American males aged 16 to 19 without a high school diploma was 49%. For Caucasian females over age 45 with a college degree, it was 4%. Local stock markets in Germany and Japan were wiped out during World War II. Entire regions were bombed out. At the end of war in Germany, and farms only produced enough food to provide country citizens with 1,000 calories a day. Compare that to the US, where the stock markets more than doubled from 1941 through the end of 1945, and the economy was the strongest it had been in almost 2 decades. No one should expect members of these groups to go through the rest of their lives thinking the same thing about inflation, or the stock market, or unemployment, or money in general. No one should expect them to respond to financial information the same way. No one should assume they are influenced by the same incentives. No one should expect them to trust the same source of advice. No one should expect them to agree on what matters, what's worth it, what's likely to happen next, and what the best path forward is. Their view of money was formed in different worlds, and when that's the case, a view about money that one group of people thinks is outrageous can make perfect sense to another. A few years ago, the New York Times did a story on the working conditions of Foxconn, the massive Taiwanese electronics manufacturer. The conditions are often atrocious. Readers were rightly upset, but a fascinating response to the story came from the nephew of a Chinese worker who wrote in a comment section. My aunt worked several years in what Americans called sweatshops. It was hard work, long hours, small wages, poor working conditions. Do you know what my aunt did before she worked in one of these factories? She was a prostitute. The idea of working in a sweatshop compared to the old lifestyle is an improvement, in my opinion. I know that my aunt would rather be exploited by an evil capitalist boss for a couple of dollars than have her body exploited by several men for pennies. This is why I was upset by so many Americans thinking we do not have the same opportunities as the West. Our government's infrastructure is different. The country is different. Yes, factory is hard labor. Could it be better? Yes, but only when you compare such to American jobs. I don't know what to make of this. Part of me wants to argue fiercely, part of me wants to understand, but mostly it's an example of how different experiences can lead to vastly different views within topics that one side intuitively thinks should be black and white. Every decision people make with money is justified by taking the information they have at the moment and plugging it into their unique mental model of how the world works. Those people can be misinformed. They can be incomplete. They can have incomplete information. They can be bad at math. They can be persuaded by raw marketing. They can have no idea what they're doing. They can misjudge the consequences of their action. Oh, can they ever? But every financial decision a person makes sense to them in the moment and checks the boxes that need to be um, makes sense to them in the moment and checks the boxes they need to check. They tell themselves a story about what they're doing and why they're doing it, and the story has been shaped by their own unique experiences. Take a simple example: lottery tickets. Americans spend more on them than movies, video games, music, sporting events, and books combined. And who buys them? Mostly poor people. The lowest income household in the US on average spend $412 a year on lotto tickets, 4 times the amount of those in the highest income group. 40% Americans cannot come up with $400 in an emergency, which is to say, those buying $400 in lottery tickets are by and large the same people who say they couldn't come up with $400 in an emergency. They are blowing their safety nets on something with a 1 in millions chance of hitting it big. That seems crazy to me. It probably seems crazy to you, too. But I'm not in the lowest income group. You're likely not either. So it's hard for many of us to intuitively grasp the subconscious reasoning of low income lottery ticket buyers. But strain a little and you can imagine it going something like this. We live paycheck to paycheck and saving seems out of reach. Our prospect for much higher wages seems out of reach. We can't afford vacations, new cars, health insurance, or homes in safe neighborhoods. We can we can't put our kids through college without tripling debt. Much of this stuff you people who read financial books either have now or have a good chance of getting. We don't. Buying a lottery ticket is the only time in our lives we can hold a tangible dream of getting the good stuff that you already have and take for granted. We are praying for a dream, and you may not understand that because you're already living a dream. That's why we buy more tickets than you do. You don't have to agree with the reason buying lotto tickets when you're broke is still a bad idea. But I kind of understand why lotto tickets sales persist. And the idea, what you're doing seems crazy, but I kind of understand what you're doing, uncovers the root of many of our financial decisions. Few people make financial decisions purely with spreadsheets. They make them at the dinner table or in a company meeting, places where personal history, your own unique view of the world, ego, pride, marketing, and old incentives are scrambled together into a narrative that works for you. Another important point that helps explain why money decisions are so difficult and why there is so much misbehavior is to recognize how new this topic is. Money has been around a long time. King Aladis of Lydia, now part of Turkey, is thought to have created the first official currency in 600 BC. But the modern foundation of money decisions, saving and investment, is based around concepts that are practically infants. Taking Take retirement. At the end of 2018, there was 27 trillion in US retirement accounts, making it the main driver of the common investors' savings and investing decisions. But the entire concept of being entitled to retirement is at most 2 generations old. Before World War II, most Americans worked until they died. That was the expectation and the reality. The labor force participation rate of men aged 65 and over was about 50% until the 1940s. And it shows a graph declining from 78% um, labor force participation rate of those 65 and older in the 1880 to um, 18 and 15% in 1990 and 2000 respectively. And then there was a little bit of a jump in 2010 up to 22%. Social Security aimed to change this, but its initial benefits were nothing close to a proper pension. When Ida Mae Fuller cashed the first Social Security check in 1940, it was for $22.54, or $416 adjusted for inflation. It was not until 1980 the average Social Security check for retirees exceeded $1,000 a month adjusted for inflation. More than a quarter of Americans over age 65 were classified by the Census Bureaus as living in poverty until the late 1960s. There is a widespread belief along the lines of everyone used to have a private pension, but this is wildly exaggerated. The Employee Benefits Research Institution explains only a quarter of those aged 65 or older had a pension income in 1975. Among that lucky minority, only 15% of household income came from a pension. The New York Times wrote in 1955 about the growing desire but continued inability to retire. To rephrase an old saying, everyone talks about retirement, but apparently very few do anything about it. It was not until the 1980s the idea that everyone deserves and should have a dignified retirement took hold. And the way to get that dignified retirement ever since has been an expectation that everyone will save and invest their own money. Let me reiterate how new the idea is. The 401k, the backbone saving vehicle of American retirement, did not exist until 1978. The Roth IRA was not born until 1998. If it were a person, it would barely be old enough to drink. It should surprise no one that many of us are bad at saving and investing for retirement. We are not crazy. We're just we're all just newbies. Same goes for college. The share of Americans over age 25 with a bachelor's degree has gone from less than 1 in 20 in 1940 to 1 in 4 by 2015. The average college tuition over that time rose more than fourfold adjusted for inflation. Something so big and so important hitting society so fast explains why, for example, so many people have made poor decisions with student loans over the last 20 years. There is not decades of accumulated experience to even attempt to learn from. We're winging it. Same for index funds, which are less than 50 years old, and hedge funds, which didn't take off until the last 25 years. Even widespread use of consumer debt, mortgages, credit cards, and car loans did not take off until after World War II, when the GI Bill made it easier for millions of Americans to borrow. Dogs were domesticated 10,000 years ago and still remain some behaviors of their wild ancestors. Yet here we are with between 20 and 50 years of experience in the modern financial system, hoping to be perfectly acclimated. For a topic that is so influential by emotions versus fact, this is a problem, and it helps explain why we don't always do what we're supposed to with money. We all do crazy stuff with money because we're all relatively new to the game, and what looks crazy to you might make sense to me. But no one is crazy. We all make decisions based on our own unique experiences that seem to make sense to us in a given moment. Now, let me tell you a story about how Bill Gates got rich. So that's the end of chapter one, and the last couple of paragraphs really kind of um, summarize chapter one pretty nicely. You know, that, um, you know, we as people let our emotions influence us more than facts when it comes to money, and that um, what might seem crazy to one person might not be crazy to another based on personal experiences shaping the way people think. So hopefully you found some value in this. If you haven't already, consider subscribing and hitting the bell notification so you can see the next time I talk about the psychology of money, or I also do some personal development related topics in addition to talking about finances. So thanks and have a good day.